You know what changed my life? The day I stopped explaining myself to people who were never going to understand me anyway. I spent years, justifying my choices, defending my dreams, apologizing for taking up space in rooms where I absolutely belonged. And you know what I got in return? Exhaustion, self-doubt, and a growing list of people who still didn't approve of me no matter how much I tried to make them understand. So let me ask you something right now. And I want you to be honest with yourself. How many hours have you lost this week explaining yourself? Explaining why you're pursuing that dream. Explaining why you said no to something that didn't serve you. Explaining why you're different, why you think differently, why you choose to live differently. How many conversations have you had where you felt like you were on trial, defending your very existence? I'm here to tell you something that might make you uncomfortable at first, but I promise you it will set you free. You don't owe anyone an explanation for being yourself. You don't owe anyone a justification for your choices, your boundaries, or your dreams. And the moment you truly understand this, not just intellectually, but deep in your bones, everything changes. Let me take you back to a moment in my life. I was 25 years old. I had just won Miss World. I was supposed to be on top of the world, right? But I remember sitting in my apartment in Mumbai, and my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Everyone had an opinion about what I should do next. My family had expectations. The industry had expectations. Society had a very clear picture of what a beauty queen should become. And there I was with this wild dream of going to Hollywood, of crossing over into an industry that had barely any representation for people who looked like me. The explanations I had to give were endless. Why Hollywood? You have everything here. Why would you leave a successful career for uncertainty? Why do you think you can make it there when so many have tried and failed? Why can't you just be grateful for what you have? And I found myself in this exhausting cycle of justifying my vision to people who couldn't see it. I was trying to make them understand something that was so clear to me but completely foreign to them. I was translating my dreams into a language they could accept, and in that translation, I was losing the essence of what made those dreams mine. Here's what I learned. When you explain yourself too much, you're not communicating. You're seeking permission. You're asking people to validate your choices so that you can feel okay about making them. But confidence doesn't ask for permission. Self-worth doesn't need validation from external sources. Think about the people you admire most in this world. The leaders, the innovators, the artists, the change makers. Do you think they spent their time explaining themselves to everyone who questioned them? Do you think Steve Jobs sat everyone down to justify why he believed a phone could be more than just a phone? Do you think Oprah explained to every critic why she deserved her own show? Do you think Serena Williams justified her greatness to people who wanted her to be smaller, quieter, more palatable? No. They had a vision, they trusted themselves, and they moved forward with conviction. And yes, they faced criticism. Yes, they faced doubt from others. But they didn't internalize that doubt. They didn't make it their responsibility to convert the non-believers. And here's the crucial part. Their refusal to over-explain wasn't arrogance. It was clarity. They knew who they were and where they were going. They understood that explaining yourself to someone who has already decided not to understand you is like pouring water into a cup with no bottom. It's a waste of your energy, your time, and your precious life force. Now, I can already hear some of you thinking, but Priyanka, isn't it important to communicate? Isn't it important to help people understand us? And yes, absolutely. Communication is vital. But there's a massive difference between healthy communication and chronic self-justification. There's a difference between sharing your truth and defending it like it's on trial. Healthy communication is when you express yourself authentically and you allow others to receive it however they choose. Chronic self-justification is when you twist yourself into knots, trying to make everyone comfortable with your choices. One comes from a place of strength and clarity. The other comes from a place of fear and people-pleasing. Let me tell you about a conversation I had early in my Hollywood career. I was at a meeting with producers for a role. I walked in confident, prepared, excited, And the first question I was asked wasn't about my acting. It wasn't about my preparation for the role. It was, so, can you lose the accent? In that moment, I had a choice. I could explain why my accent was part of my identity. I could justify why being authentically me was more important than fitting into their narrow definition of what an actress should sound like. I could spend the next 20 minutes defending my right to exist as I am. Or I could simply say, this is who I am. If that works for you, great. If it doesn't, I understand. I chose the latter, and you know what happened? I didn't get that role. But I kept my dignity, I kept my sense of self, and more importantly, I sent a message to the universe and to myself about what I was willing to accept and what I wasn't. 6 months later, I got a call for a role where they specifically wanted someone with my background, my accent, my perspective. They wanted authenticity, not assimilation. And that role opened doors I couldn't have imagined. But it only happened because I stopped trying to explain myself into boxes I was never meant to fit in. Here's what I want you to understand. Every time you over-explain yourself, you're sending a message to your subconscious mind. You're saying, I'm not sure about this. I need approval. I need validation. And your subconscious mind responds accordingly. It creates more doubt, more insecurity, more need for external validation. It becomes a vicious cycle. But when you stop explaining, when you stand in your truth without apology, you send a different message. You say, I trust myself. I know my worth. I don't need everyone to understand me to move forward. And that message transforms everything. It changes your energy. It changes how people perceive you. It changes what opportunities come your way. Now, let's talk about where this need to explain ourselves comes from, because understanding the root is crucial to breaking free from it. For most of us, it starts in childhood. We're taught that being good means being understood and accepted by others. We're taught that disagreement or disapproval means we've done something wrong. We're conditioned to believe that if someone doesn't approve of us, we need to fix that, explain better, be more convincing. Add to that the cultural conditioning many of us face. In my culture, there's a concept that roughly translates to, what will people say? This idea is so deeply ingrained that entire life decisions are made based on avoiding criticism or judgment from others. Career choices, marriage choices, lifestyle choices, all filtered through the lens of whether we can adequately explain and justify them to society. And for women, there's an additional layer. We're often socialized to be accommodating, to smooth over conflicts, to make everyone comfortable. Asserting ourselves without explanation can be labeled as aggressive, difficult, or unlikable. So we over-explain as a way to soften our boundaries, to make our no more palatable, to cushion our ambitions with endless justifications. But here's the truth. The people who truly love and respect you don't need lengthy explanations. They trust you. They believe in your judgment. They give you the benefit of the doubt. And the people who don't, well, no amount of explaining will convince them anyway. So why are we exhausting ourselves for the latter group? I remember when I decided to write my memoir. Oh, the opinions I received. Why do you need to tell your story? You're too young. Why would you expose your private life? Why are you being so vulnerable in public? And I could have spent years explaining why my story mattered, why representation mattered, why vulnerability was strength, not weakness. Instead, I wrote the book. I told my truth. I let the work speak for itself. And you know what happened? The people it was meant to reach found it. It resonated. It helped them. It created connection. And the people who didn't understand, they still didn't understand, and that was okay. Their lack of understanding didn't diminish the value of what I created. This is what I need you to grasp. Your value is not determined by unanimous approval. Your worth is not calculated by how many people understand your choices. You are not a democracy where everyone gets a vote on your life. You are the sovereign leader of your own existence, and the only approval you truly need is your own. Now, let's get practical, because I know some of you are thinking, this sounds great, Priyanka, but how do I actually do this? How do I stop a habit that's been ingrained in me for decades? Let me walk you through it. First, awareness. Start noticing when you're explaining yourself. Pay attention to that feeling in your chest when you're justifying your choices. Notice the energy drain when you're trying to convince someone who isn't genuinely interested in understanding. Awareness is always the first step to change. You can't transform what you don't acknowledge. Second, pause before you speak. When someone questions your choice or challenges your decision, take a breath. Count to 3. In that pause, ask yourself, does this person need an explanation, or am I about to explain out of habit and fear? Is this person genuinely trying to understand me, or are they simply disagreeing with me? And most importantly, do I owe this person insight into my reasoning? Sometimes the answer will be yes. Your partner deserves to understand why you're making a major life decision. Your children deserve age-appropriate explanations for family changes. Your team at work deserves context for strategic decisions that affect them. But the key word here is deserves. Not everyone deserves unlimited access to your reasoning and your inner world. Third, practice simple responses. You don't need to be rude or dismissive, but you can be clear and boundaried. I appreciate your concern, but I'm comfortable with my decision. I understand this might not make sense to you, and that's okay. I've thought about this carefully, and this is what feels right for me. I'm not looking for advice right now, but thank you for caring. These responses acknowledge the other person without making their understanding a prerequisite for your action. They're respectful but firm. They close the door on endless back and forth without slamming it in anyone's face. Fourth, get comfortable with disapproval. This is the hardest part, and I won't sugarcoat it. When you stop explaining yourself, some people will be uncomfortable. Some will be offended. Some will label you as arrogant or difficult or changed, and you have to be okay with that. Not everyone will like the version of you that respects yourself enough to stop seeking constant approval, and that's information, not indictment. The people who truly value you will adjust. They'll respect your boundaries. They might need a moment to adapt to this new dynamic, but they'll come around. And the people who don't, they were probably more invested in controlling you than understanding you anyway. I'll never forget attending an event where someone asked me, how do you balance your career and personal life? It's a question women get constantly, as if we need to justify the audacity of having both ambition and relationships. And I remember stopping and thinking, why am I being asked to explain my balance? Why is my life equation everyone's business? So instead of launching into an explanation of my schedule, my priorities, my support system, instead of justifying my choices, I simply said, I don't believe in balance. I believe in integration. I do what I love, and I love what I do. And the people who matter most are part of that journey. And I moved on. Was everyone satisfied with that answer? Absolutely not. Some people wanted the detailed breakdown, the step-by-step guide, the justification. But I wasn't there to satisfy everyone's curiosity. I was there to live my life, to share my work, to connect with people who resonated with my message. And that required me to stop treating every question as an interrogation I needed to pass. Here's something else I've learned. When you stop explaining yourself, you become more magnetic, not less. People are drawn to clarity and confidence. They're attracted to individuals who know who they are and aren't apologizing for it. Think about it. Who would you rather follow? Someone who constantly seeks validation and approval, or someone who moves through the world with quiet certainty and authentic conviction? This doesn't mean you become rigid or closed off. It doesn't mean you stop growing or being open to feedback. In fact, when you stop defensive explaining, you create space for genuine dialogue. You can actually hear constructive feedback because you're not in constant defense mode. You can be vulnerable and open because you're not trying to control everyone's perception of you. There's a concept I love in Eastern philosophy about Wu Wei, which roughly translates to effortless action or going with the flow. It's about acting in accordance with your nature without force or struggle. When you stop explaining yourself, you tap into this principle. You move through life more naturally, more authentically, with less resistance and more grace. Let me share another story. When I was filming Quantico, the first network drama series with a South Asian lead on American television, the pressure was immense. I was representing not just myself, but an entire community that had been underrepresented for so long. Every choice I made, every interview I gave, every outfit I wore, It all felt like it carried enormous weight, and people had opinions. Oh, did they have opinions? I wasn't Indian enough for some people. I was too Indian for others. I was too glamorous, too serious, too outspoken, too reserved, depending on who you ask. And I could have spent every waking moment explaining my choices, defending my portrayal, justifying my approach. Instead, I focused on the work. I trusted my instincts. I made choices that felt authentic to me and to the character, and I let the show speak for itself. Did everyone love it? No. Did everyone understand what I was trying to do? No. But it resonated with millions of people. It opened doors, it changed the conversation, and it did all of that not because I explained it into existence, but because I believed in it enough to let it stand on its own. This is the power of stopping the explanation cycle. You free up so much energy, mental, emotional, spiritual energy, that you were wasting on justification. And you redirect that energy into creation, into action, into actually living your life instead of constantly defending it. Now, I want to address something important. Some of you might be thinking, but what about accountability? What about taking responsibility? Isn't refusing to explain just avoiding consequences? And this is a crucial distinction. There's a massive difference between being accountable and constantly explaining yourself. Accountability is when you take responsibility for your actions and their impact. If you hurt someone, you acknowledge it. If you make a mistake, you own it. If your choices affect others, you consider that impact. This is about integrity and character. Explanation addiction, on the other hand, is when you feel compelled to justify every choice to everyone, even when your choices haven't harmed anyone and don't affect them. You can be deeply accountable without being constantly explanatory. You can take full responsibility for your life without making that life everyone else's business. You can be considerate of others while still maintaining sovereignty over your own choices. In fact, I'd argue that people who are constantly explaining themselves are often avoiding true accountability. They're so busy justifying and defending that they never get to the heart of ownership. They're managing perceptions instead of taking genuine responsibility. Let me give you an example from my own life. When I decided to take a break from Bollywood to focus on Hollywood, there were hurt feelings in the Indian film industry. Some felt I was abandoning my roots, turning my back on the industry that gave me my start. And I had to sit with that. I had to acknowledge that my choice, while right for me, had an impact on others. But here's what I didn't do. I didn't explain myself into the ground. I didn't spend years justifying my decision to everyone who felt slighted. I didn't try to convince everyone that they should support my choice. Instead, I acknowledged the impact, expressed my gratitude for where I'd come from, and moved forward with my decision. I took accountability without drowning in explanation. And you know what? Years later, many of those same people understood. Not because I explained it to them ad nauseum, but because my work, my success, my continued love for Indian cinema, it all spoke for itself. Time and results are often better communicators than words ever could be. This brings me to another critical point. When you stop explaining yourself, you start trusting that your actions will speak louder than your words. You shift from a defensive posture to a creative one. Instead of constantly justifying what you're doing, you focus on doing it so well that justification becomes irrelevant. Think about any great artist, entrepreneur, or leader. They don't spend their time explaining their vision to skeptics. They execute the vision so brilliantly that eventually the skeptics become believers, or at least irrelevant to the story. Elon Musk didn't convince everyone that electric cars were the future before building Tesla. Oprah didn't explain to everyone why she deserved her own network before creating OWN. Malala didn't justify her right to education before becoming a global advocate for it. They moved, they acted, they created, and their creations changed minds in ways explanation never could. So what is it costing you to constantly explain yourself? Really sit with this question. What opportunities are you missing because you're too busy justifying yourself to skeptics? What dreams are on hold because you're waiting for unanimous approval before you act? What version of yourself are you not becoming because you're too exhausted from defending the person you already are? The cost is real, and it's high. Every moment you spend explaining yourself to someone who's determined not to understand is a moment stolen from your growth, your creativity, your actual life. It's time and energy you could be investing in becoming better, doing more, experiencing deeper. I think about the hours I lost in my 20s, trying to make everyone comfortable with my ambition, trying to explain why I wanted more, why I wasn't satisfied with what society deemed enough. For someone like me, if I could reclaim those hours, that energy, that mental space, imagine what else I could have created, experienced, become. But here's the beautiful thing. The moment you decide to stop, the moment you truly commit to ending the explanation cycle, you reclaim all of that. Not the past time, obviously, but all of the future time. You free yourself to focus on what actually matters. And what actually matters: living authentically, creating value, building meaningful relationships, pursuing your purpose, making an impact. None of these things require you to explain yourself to people who aren't part of your journey. Let's talk about relationships for a moment, because this is where the explanation trap can be most insidious. In healthy relationships, whether romantic, familial, or friendship, there should be a baseline of trust and mutual respect. This means that while you might explain your reasoning to give insight and foster connection, you're not constantly justifying your existence or defending your worth. If you find yourself in a relationship where you're constantly explaining yourself, where you feel perpetually on trial, where your choices are always met with suspicion or disapproval, that's not a relationship problem you can solve with better explanations. That's a fundamental lack of trust and respect that no amount of justification will fix. I've been in relationships where I felt I had to explain everything. Why I took that job, why I spoke to that person, why I felt that way, why I wanted what I wanted. And I convinced myself that I was being communicative, that I was building intimacy through transparency. But what I was really doing was shrinking myself, apologizing for my existence, seeking permission to be who I was. Real intimacy doesn't require constant explanation. It's built on trust, on the assumption of good intentions, on space for each person to be fully themselves. When you're with someone who truly loves and respects you, you can say, "This is important to me," and that's enough. You don't need a dissertation on why it's important. You don't need to justify its importance. Your word, your feelings, your choices, they have inherent value because you are valuable. And if someone can't accept that, if someone needs endless explanations before they'll respect your choices, that person doesn't belong in your inner circle. They can be an acquaintance, a colleague, someone you're cordial with. But they shouldn't be someone whose approval you're constantly seeking, whose understanding you're endlessly pursuing. This goes for family too, and I know that's complicated. In many cultures, including mine, family opinion carries enormous weight. Family approval is seen as paramount. Disappointing family can feel like the worst possible outcome. But even in family relationships, there has to be a line. There has to be a point where you say, "I love you, I value your presence in my life, but I'm an adult making my own choices, and I need you to trust me even if you don't fully understand." Will this create tension? Possibly. Will some family members struggle with it? Probably. But the alternative is living your entire life according to someone else's script, and that's not living at all. That's performing. That's existing for the comfort of others while your own soul slowly suffocates. I had to have hard conversations with my family. Conversations where I said, essentially, "I know you're worried. I know this isn't what you envisioned for me. But this is my path, and I need you to support me, or at least step back and let me walk it." Were those easy conversations? Absolutely not. Did everyone immediately understand and applaud? No. But over time, as they saw me thriving, as they saw me handling challenges, as they saw me becoming more fully myself, they came around. Not because I explained my way to their approval, but because I trusted myself enough to act without it. Here's what I need you to hear. You are not responsible for making everyone understand your journey. You are not required to bring everyone along on your path. Some people are meant to be part of your story, and some aren't. And trying to force someone to understand you when they're determined not to is like trying to grow a plant in concrete. You can water it all you want, but the environment is wrong for growth. Your job is to be authentic, to be true to yourself, to honor your values and your vision. Your job is not to convince everyone that your authenticity is valid. It is valid, period. It doesn't need a jury's approval. Now, let me talk about the flip side of this because it's equally important. When you stop explaining yourself, you also need to stop expecting explanations from others. You need to extend that same freedom you're claiming for yourself. You need to trust others to make their own choices without interrogating them, without demanding justifications. This is about consistency and integrity. If you want people to respect your autonomy, you have to respect theirs. If you want people to trust your judgment, you have to trust theirs. This doesn't mean you accept everything everyone does, but it means you allow people to be adults making their own decisions without your approval. I had to learn this with my team. Early in my career, when I started building my production company, I wanted to understand and approve every decision. I wanted explanations for every choice. And what I created was a culture of micromanagement and second guessing. People couldn't take initiative because they knew they'd have to justify everything. When I stepped back, when I hired people I trusted and then actually trusted them, everything changed. I stopped demanding explanations and started seeing results. I gave people autonomy and they rose to meet it. The work got better, the energy got lighter, and we all thrived. This principle applies everywhere. In your friendships, stop demanding explanations for every choice that's different from what you would make. In your family, stop requiring justifications for life paths that diverge from your expectations. In your relationships, stop interrogating every decision. Trust people, give them space, and watch how the relationships deepen as a result. Because here's the truth. The explanation trap goes both ways. When you're constantly explaining yourself, you're also constantly seeking explanations from others. It's a transactional way of relating that's exhausting for everyone involved. It treats relationships like contracts where every clause needs interpretation and justification. But the best relationships aren't contractual. They're covenantal. They're based on deep trust and commitment that transcends the need to understand every single thing. Let me share something vulnerable with me. There was a time when I almost gave up on Hollywood. The rejection was relentless. The stereotyping was frustrating. The lack of opportunities for someone like me was disheartening. And everyone had an explanation for why I should quit. The industry isn't ready. The timing is wrong. You're too foreign. You're too successful elsewhere to start over. And I listened to all of it. I absorbed all those explanations for why my dream wasn't practical, wasn't feasible, wasn't meant to be. And for a moment, just a moment, I almost believed them. I almost let other people's explanations become my reality. But then I realized something. These people, as well-meaning as they might be, they were explaining away my dream from their perspective, their fears, their limitations. They weren't inside my vision. They weren't connected to my purpose. They didn't have the faith I had in what was possible. So I stopped listening to their explanations. And more importantly, I stopped feeling like I owed them explanations in return. I stopped trying to convince them that I could make it. I stopped defending my dream. I just pursued it, quietly, persistently, relentlessly. And you know the rest of the story. Quantico happened, movies happened, producer credits happened. Opportunities I couldn't have imagined happened, not because I explained my way into them, but because I focused my energy on preparation, on showing up, on being so undeniably good that opportunities had to take notice. This is what becomes possible when you stop wasting your energy on explanations and redirect it toward execution. When you stop talking about your dreams to skeptics and start working on them instead. When you stop seeking permission and start taking purposeful action. I want you to imagine for a moment what your life could look like 6 months from now if you stopped explaining yourself today. Really picture it. What would you be doing differently? What risks would you take? What boundaries would you set? What dreams would you pursue? Maybe you'd finally start that business you've been talking about for years, but never launching because you're worried about what people will think. Maybe you'd end that relationship that's been draining you, but you've stayed in because you feel obligated to explain why someone who seems great on paper doesn't feel right in practice. Maybe you'd move to that city, change that career, write that book, take that chance. All of these possibilities are waiting for you on the other side of explanation addiction. They're waiting for you to trust yourself enough to act without unanimous approval. They're waiting for you to value your own inner knowing more than external validation. And yes, it's scary. Change is always scary. Setting boundaries is uncomfortable. Disappointing people feels terrible, even when those people don't have your best interests at heart. But you know what's scarier? What's more uncomfortable? Waking up at 65 and realizing you lived someone else's life because you were too busy explaining yourself to live your own. I meet people all the time who are living with regret, who took the safe path, the approved path, the path that required the least explanation, and they're successful by society standards. They checked all the boxes, they pleased all the right people, and they're miserable. Because deep down, they know they abandoned themselves. They traded their truth for approval, and no amount of external success can fill that void. Don't let that be you. Don't sacrifice your authenticity on the altar of other people's comfort. Don't abandon your dreams because they're too hard to explain. Don't shrink yourself to fit into boxes you were never meant to occupy. You are not here to live a life that makes sense to everyone. You're here to live a life that's true to you. And that life, that beautiful, authentic, fully expressed life, it doesn't need a defense. It doesn't need justification. It just needs you to have the courage to live it. Now, I'm going to be honest with you about something. This journey of stopping the explanation cycle, it's not a one-time decision. It's a daily practice. Some days you'll be strong and boundaried and clear. Other days you'll find yourself falling into old patterns, justifying and defending and seeking approval. And that's okay. That's human. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is progress. Every time you catch yourself over-explaining, you have an opportunity. You can stop mid-sentence. You can say, actually, you know what? I don't need to explain this. You can course correct. You can choose differently. And each time you do, you strengthen that muscle. You build that confidence. You reinforce to yourself that you are enough exactly as you are without explanation. I still catch myself sometimes, even now. I'll be in a meeting or an interview, and I'll feel that old urge to justify myself, to over-explain, to make sure everyone understands and approves. And I have to consciously pull back. I have to remind myself that my worth isn't contingent on their understanding. That my choices don't need their approval to be valid. It's a practice, like meditation, like exercise, like any skill worth developing. You get better with time, but you never reach a point where you don't have to be mindful of it. And that's fine. That awareness, that consciousness, it's part of what keeps you authentic. Let me tell you what happens when you consistently practice this, when you regularly choose self-trust over external validation, when you habitually honor your truth without apology. You start to attract different people into your life. The people pleasers and the skeptics and the critics, they fall away. They're no longer energetically compatible with who you're becoming. And in their place, you attract people who value authenticity, people who respect boundaries, people who celebrate your success rather than demanding explanations for it, people who trust you even when they don't fully understand you. Your circle becomes smaller, perhaps, but infinitely more nourishing. This is one of the greatest gifts of stopping the explanation cycle. You end up surrounded by people who get you, who support you, who energize rather than drain you. Because you're no longer tolerating relationships where you have to constantly defend your existence. You're only maintaining relationships where there's mutual respect and trust. And in your work, in your career, the same thing happens. You start attracting opportunities that align with your authentic self rather than the version of you that's palatable to everyone. You stop getting offers that require you to compromise your values or dim your light. You start receiving opportunities that celebrate exactly who you are. This doesn't happen overnight. It's a gradual shift, but it's real. The universe, life, God, whatever you believe in, it responds to authenticity. It rewards courage. It supports people who are willing to be fully themselves even when that's uncomfortable. I think about the roles I get offered now versus the roles I was offered 15 years ago. Early on, I was offered one-dimensional characters, stereotypes, roles that required me to play small, and I could have explained to every casting director why I deserved better. I could have justified my worth. I could have defended my potential. Instead, I turned down roles that didn't serve me. I created my own content. I produced stories that reflected the complexity and depth I knew was possible. And slowly, the industry started to see me differently. Not because I explained my way into different opportunities, but because I demonstrated through my choices and my work what I was capable of. Now I get offers for complex, nuanced, powerful characters. I get approached for producing deals and brand partnerships that align with my values. I'm in rooms where I'm not explaining why I deserve to be there. Everyone already knows, and that shift happened because I stopped seeking permission and started claiming space. You can do the same in whatever field you're in. Whether you're an artist, an entrepreneur, a teacher, a parent, a student, whatever your role, whatever your dream, you can stop explaining yourself into existence and start living yourself into it. Here's a powerful shift in perspective that helped me. Instead of thinking, how can I make them understand? Start thinking, how can I be so undeniable that understanding becomes inevitable? Instead of putting your energy into explanation, put it into excellence, into mastery, into becoming so good at what you do that your work speaks louder than your words ever could. This is about shifting from a defensive posture to an offensive one. In sports terms, it's about playing to win rather than playing not to lose. When you're constantly explaining yourself, you're playing defense. You're reacting to other people's doubts and questions. You're in a perpetual state of justification. But when you stop explaining and start executing, you're on offense. You're creating, building, moving forward. You're not worried about defending your position because you're too busy advancing it. And that shift in energy changes everything. People feel it. They sense it. There's a magnetism to someone who's focused on their mission rather than on managing perceptions. There's a power to someone who's more interested in results than approval. And that power attracts resources, opportunities, and support in ways that explaining yourself never will. Let me give you a practical challenge. For the next week, I want you to keep a journal. Every time you feel the urge to explain yourself, write it down. Note the situation, the person, the feeling. Don't judge yourself for it. Just observe. At the end of the week, look at your entries. You'll probably notice patterns. Certain people who consistently trigger your need to explain. Certain situations where you feel most defensive. Certain topics where you're most uncertain. That awareness is gold, because once you see the patterns, you can start to address them. Maybe you need to have a conversation with that person who always puts you on trial. Maybe you need to avoid certain situations until you're stronger in your boundaries. Maybe you need to work on your confidence in certain areas so you're less shaken by questions or doubts. But the key is awareness. You can't change what you're not conscious of, and most of us are explaining ourselves on autopilot, not even realizing how much energy we're hemorrhaging in the process. As you become more aware, start experimenting with different responses. Try the pause I mentioned earlier. Count to 3 before responding to a challenge or question. In that space, you might find that you don't need to say anything at all. Or you might craft a response that's boundaried and brief rather than explanatory and exhaustive. Practice phrases like, "That's an interesting perspective, but I'm comfortable with my choice." Or, "I appreciate your concern, but I've got this." Or simply, "Thank you for sharing your thoughts." These responses acknowledge the other person without making their understanding your responsibility. You'll notice something interesting as you do this. Some people will be uncomfortable at first. They're used to you explaining yourself. They're used to you seeking their approval. When you stop, they might push back. They might accuse you of being closed off or arrogant or changed. This is normal. They're adjusting to a new dynamic. Hold your ground. The people who truly care about you will adapt. The ones who don't, well, you have your answer about what they valued in the relationship. One of the most liberating realizations I've ever had is this: You can't control what people think of you, but you can control how much energy you spend trying to. You can't make everyone understand you, but you